maternity leave look like for a freelancer or an independent contractor? That is exactly what I'm going to break down for you in today's episode. If you're new here, I'm Emily Bales. I'm a Pinterest marketing expert and coach, and for the past 5 years, I've helped my students and my clients increase their traffic and turn it into profit through the power of Pinterest marketing. Whether you are a business owner wanting to learn more about how to market on Pinterest, or you're thinking about starting your Pinterest management business, or looking to scale that Pinterest management business, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel and never miss another episode. So let's get to it though. What does that look like if you are thinking about freelancing, or maybe you already have a freelance business and you're either pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, and you want to make sure that you have plans in place and you know what to expect and how to plan for that. So I want to share just a little bit of my story so I can kind of walk you through what that looked like for me. And what I'm sharing is just my personal experience, what worked for me. You can take that with a grain of salt if you would like. However, inside my Pinterest Manager Academy, I am offering support and ongoing coaching to my students. And I know that simply just having somebody who can answer their questions and share what they did themselves that worked for them is really helpful. And then of course, people can always modify or change or, adjust their schedules accordingly based off of their needs, their life, and what they think is going to work for them. So let's go to my story. So I was actually a former teacher. I taught kindergarten for 3.5 years. I taught kindergarten for 3 years, and I was actually teaching second grade, and I taught second grade for part of a year, and that was the year that I actually had my first daughter. And when I left my teaching job, I had actually fully intended on going back to teaching after having my daughter, but ultimately after we really crunched the numbers, looked into different options in terms of daycare. A lot of daycares, if you are going to take 3 days a week, they require you to pay 5 days a week because you're really taking a spot. And so, long story short, it didn't make sense financially for us to utilize daycare with my teaching income, especially if I was only going to go back to teaching part-time, which I just knew even before I had her that I wasn't gonna wanna go back 5 days a week. And so I at least had really worked something out with the school where I had a co-teacher. There was always consistency in the classroom, but I had decided I was going to go back part-time. But those feelings changed, and plus the financial side, it was a really tough decision, and it wasn't one that I took lightly. And I felt so conflicted because I loved my students, I loved my coworkers, and there was a lot of guilt surrounding that decision. But ultimately, I really didn't want to leave my daughter, but it also just didn't make sense financially. I couldn't justify paying to work, which was ultimately, I wasn't even gonna be breaking even. I was actually gonna be paying to work. So needless to say, I did quit my teaching job, and this was back in 2017. Fast forward to 2018, I had essentially adjusted to motherhood, which is a big adjustment, and really gotten used to what I felt like was gonna be my new normal. However, about 8 months into that adjustment, and my daughter was 8 months old, I was feeling this pull, and I would actually say go back a couple of months to closer to when she was really maybe 6 or 7 months old. I was starting to look into different options. So I haven't shared this a ton. I do have other episodes about my story, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about my story and how I got to where I am today, working from home as a Pinterest marketer. But I will make sure to link those other episodes in the description where I do share more about my story. But I looked into photography, I looked into VIP Kids Teacher. None of those things felt right. But then I found freelancing, where I discovered you could offer a service, and there's so many different types of freelance services you can offer between copywriting, virtual assisting, social media management, Pinterest management, and it just felt me. So that's why I ultimately decided to start my freelance business. And I knew that I was never going to go back to teaching, and I don't know that I had fully come to terms with that at the time. And when people would ask me, do you think you'll ever go back to teaching? I think I would even entertain the idea and say, yeah, maybe, I'm not really sure. But deep down, I think I knew that I was never gonna go back to teaching. And like I said, it just didn't financially make sense. Plus, we knew we wanted to have more kids, God willing. And so when my daughter was 8 months old, I decided to go all in and start my freelance business. And I did invest in a course that really taught me the basics of business because I had no prior business experience. I wasn't some serial entrepreneur where I had tried and done multiple different things. I was a teacher and I thought I would always be a teacher. And if I wasn't a teacher, I thought that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and I was perfectly content with that. However, alas, life is very expensive. And I decided that not only were we kind of getting uncomfortable, honestly, financially, and this was back in 2018, before things were as expensive as they are now in 2024 as I'm recording this episode, but we knew we wanted to travel, and as our kids got older, they only get more expensive as they do activities, and plus I just wanted something that was mine. I wanted another outlet. I wanted to invest myself in something else, and I love to learn and grow. And like I said, I looked into the photography, I looked into the VIP kids teaching, and those things just didn't feel right. And I can't explain it other than I knew in my gut that freelancing was for me. And so I decided to go all in on freelancing. And I will say, I don't want to say impulsive. Like I said, I really think about how I feel about things. I really am a religious person. I pray about things. And I just knew that starting my freelance business was the next best step. But I didn't think about some of the other important details that go along with that, such as we knew we wanted to have more kids and planning for maternity leaves. And so that wasn't actually something that I had even processed before I got started. And I guess I just assumed I would cross that bridge when I came to it. But I actually do get asked quite frequently by women who are thinking about starting their Pinterest management business, because that's really what I specialize in. Yes, I started as a freelancer. Side note, I did virtual assisting and social media management for about a year. And then I did pivot to Pinterest management. And that is what I have been doing solely for the past 5 years. But I actually started my freelance business in 2018, and that was actually 6 years ago. So that first year was a lot of search and discovery, figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like in terms of virtual assisting and social media management. And that's why I ultimately listened to another instinct I had that was telling me I would love Pinterest. And that's when I pivoted. And that was actually in the late spring of 2019. And I was actually pregnant by then with my second daughter. So some things that, you have to think and take into consideration. So when I was teaching, I want to talk about what that would have looked like with my maternity leave versus freelancing and taking a maternity leave. So when I was teaching, the school I was working with was great. Like I said, they were gonna let me come back part-time, which is kind of unheard of for teachers. But as far as the maternity leave, I wasn't gonna get a paid maternity leave. If I had a lot of PTO days accrued, then yeah, I could take as many PTO days, but I had only been teaching for 3.5 years. I had to take PTO hours when I was sick or I had no doctor's appointment, which actually, side note, I literally never took a sick day. And so I should say I took PTO hours if I had a doctor's appointment, or occasionally I would take one day off where I would take a long weekend trip with my husband somewhere, or sometimes we would travel with his family and we would take a long weekend trip somewhere. And I kind of started off in the hole because I got married in 2014, and they were great. Once again, the school I worked with was great. They allowed me to take my honeymoon. They knew that I was getting married right out of the gate. So I literally taught for 1 week, got married, and then went on a week-long honeymoon. And so I was starting off in the hole. So I got paid for that time, but I was like negative however many PTO hours. So I kind of had to work my way out of the hole. And I want to say I only got 3 hours of PTO for every 2 weeks I worked. So you can see how it takes a little while to kind of build that up, especially when you're starting off in the hole. And I would say throughout the year, I would maybe only take 1 or 2 days here and there. But needless to say, there was no way by the time I had my daughter, 3.5 years in, that I really had, all of this PTO time saved up. So what I did do was I actually was paying for short-term disability through Aflac, and I was able to get, I want to say I had 2 paychecks, but once again, I wasn't sure when we were going to start our family, when I would get pregnant, and you can't just sign up for short-term disability after you get pregnant. It's like a pre-existing condition. And so I had to, there's only times of the year that there was open enrollment. So I signed up 1 year in August. That year I didn't get pregnant. So then I was like, okay, well, I don't know how we're gonna feel. And it wasn't even, this is TMI, it wasn't even that we were trying to have kids. I just didn't know how we were gonna feel. You don't always know how you're gonna feel. And so Anyways, then that second year, I was paying for short-term disability. We did decide to, start trying for our family. And anyways, so I got pregnant, and it was good that I had the short-term disability, but I had paid way more into that than honestly I should have. I should have just been taking that money and setting it aside. Yes, because I had short-term disability, it did, encompass other things, like God forbid there be an accident or something where I couldn't work, I would have been covered for that. And I think that's part of the reason in the back of my mind, you never know what can happen. So I kind of liked having that extra layer of peace of mind, but I was paying into this, insurance for a couple of years and it wasn't being utilized. So by the time I had my daughter, I did, like I said, get those 2 paychecks essentially, but I didn't have, multiple months of maternity leave or anything like that. The school essentially said, we will hold your job for up to a year, but they don't give you paid time off. If you have saved up PTO days, or if you have something like short-term disability insurance, then, you'll get a paycheck. So as far as the maternity leave and what that looked like for teaching, that was my reality. So when I was thinking about freelancing, I just knew I had all of this control. And like I said, I just knew that this was going to be a good fit for me. And in 2018, when I started my business, I had no idea when we would have another baby, or like I said, if you never know, things can happen, if we would have another one. And so it was in March of 2019 that I found out I was pregnant with our second. And I didn't immediately start thinking about maternity leave or what that would look like. I just cross bridges when I come to them. And that could be a good thing, or some people, might feel uncomfortable with that for obvious reasons. So what works for me, I'm not saying works for everybody. I think too, my business was so new that it was very manageable. It wasn't that I had dozens and dozens of clients and all these moving pieces. I was a service provider. I had a very simple business model. I wasn't using social media. I didn't have an email list. I didn't have a team. It was still very simple, if that makes sense. And so I think I maybe had 2 or 3 clients, and it felt very manageable. And so that was in March of 2019. By June of 2019, it's crazy how things can change. At that point, I knew I was totally done with virtual assisting and social media management. And around that time, I had a client who asked me to play around with her Pinterest account. And it was kind of like all of the stars aligned, because I was totally over virtual assisting and social media management. But I had always known in the back of my mind that Pinterest really interested me, but I just didn't know how you managed accounts. I didn't know where to go to learn this skill. I didn't know of any courses. I just felt like I was doing what was maybe honestly the most comfortable thing, which was kind of staying in that zone of like, okay, virtual assisting, social media management. So when she asked me to play around with her account, I loved it. She started seeing results. And I know that sounds weird to say that I was playing around with her account. She knew that I had no Pinterest marketing experience. So she actually did pay me to start working on it, optimizing it. I was trying to do research, ask questions from people who I knew were already Pinterest managers, because I actually had made some online connections with other people who were Pinterest managers. And I actually even took somebody's Pinterest beta course. It wasn't even because she hadn't really launched it yet. She was actually looking for beta students, so she wasn't even charged, and I got to take it for free. But she doesn't even have that now. That's not even what she does anymore. And it was super basic. I felt that I could start designing pins and doing some things for this client that was paying me a very discounted rate. Or I should say my rates were very discounted compared to what I was charging with social media management, but it was fair because I also was literally learning Pinterest. But she started to see results, and it really showed me what I needed to know, which was that I loved Pinterest. So in 2019, that summer was so interesting because I started also working with that fall a business coach. And it was a really hard decision, but I decided to ultimately let go of all of the clients who were not Pinterest related clients. And that was really hard because I was kind of starting my business back over. But it was truly what needed to happen. And so for me, with taking a maternity leave as a freelancer, this was really my first experience to it, because when I first started my business, I already had the baby. She was a good napper. I kept her on a schedule. She slept throughout the night. So I would work in the evening, I'd work during her nap time, I'd work early morning hours before she got up. I had really a good schedule, and I didn't have to worry about, having days or weeks where I was taking off. And so it all, like I said, the stars really started to align because it was really hard to let go of that income that I had worked really hard to build up until that point. But it's what needed to happen so that I could really lean into this new service. And the business coach really guided me to do that. It kind of felt as if I was starting back over, but it also told me so much about freelancing, the consistency, the stability. I knew in my heart if I started once and started offering these services and learning things that were totally out of my comfort zone, if I did that once, I could do it again. And that's really what I felt like I was doing when I started with just Pinterest management. So in 2019, at that point at the end of 2019, I had 2 Pinterest management clients. And the way that I approached it was I just had a conversation with them that I was getting ready to have a baby and I was gonna need to get ahead on their work. And I actually, to skip forward to 2022, started to do I approached it the same way in 2022 when I had and was pregnant with my 3rd daughter. So the first thing I would definitely recommend if you were thinking about freelancing and getting started and what that can look like in terms of planning for a maternity leave, whether you're currently a freelancer or you want to get started as a freelancer, but you know you're already pregnant or you might get pregnant. Number 1, have conversations with your clients. Now, I'm not saying that the day you take a positive pregnancy test that you should go and tell your clients. I want to say I waited until I was 16 or 20 weeks, but I did wait multiple months, but I also gave myself multiple months to have conversations with them and plan accordingly so that I didn't have to let go of those clients, but we could come up with a plan that would work for them and something that they were comfortable with. And that has been huge for me with keeping good and positive relationships with my clients is open communication, just being a good communicator. And at the end of the day, if they didn't want to continue to work with me because I was pregnant, that was the reality of the situation and I had to be upfront about that. So I discussed it with my clients, talked to them about how I would love to continue to work with them and find a plan that would work for them in terms of me having the baby, continuing to work with them, but also there not being a gap in their Pinterest marketing schedule because that was going to reflect on their growth as well. So I will say I worked with amazing women. A lot of them were teacher business owners and they were totally fine with me taking a maternity leave. And this was really how I handled it with my 2nd daughter and my 3rd. So I've not just had one child while I've been running, but like I said, with that first one, I had already had her, already had gone through the postpartum phase before starting my business. So, but I have had 2 more pregnancies and actually what kind of inspired this episode too is I am at that point in my 4th pregnancy where I could be having my baby tomorrow or it could be another 2.5 weeks from now. So I am largely pregnant as I am recording this. My business model has now changed. However, I have had my freelance business, like I've already said, multiple years through multiple pregnancies. So I was so excited to share these tips with you. So open communication is definitely a must. Figuring out what's going to work for them, what's going to work for you. Step 2, you have to prepare. So as I was getting closer to my maternity leave, I have never had consistent childcare. So I knew that I was going to want to arrange some childcare so that I could get ahead with my clients' scheduling and their Pinterest strategy. So step 1 was open communication, finding what would work for them and also me. They were okay with me getting ahead on their Pinterest marketing strategy and really batching and scheduling their content. And like I said, that was something we talked through. So step 2, I had to make sure that I had childcare lined up so that I could get that work done. So I had my mother-in-law, I had a couple of different sitters. I had to work more hours ahead of time because I knew I didn't want there to be a gap and I didn't want to have a month or 2 where I wasn't having income because I was hitting pause. So another option you could look into is you could always ask your clients about pausing work, stopping 1 month, taking 6 to 8 weeks off and then starting up again. But one thing that is a little bit challenging about that is it could hurt their Pinterest strategy because Pinterest really thrives on consistency. So I knew it was in my client's best interest if I could get ahead and really batch that content. And thankfully, they were totally fine with me batching that work and getting ahead. And like I said, it was really in their best interest as well because then there weren't gaps in their schedule. It worked for me, it worked for them. Now, one thing I did try to get back to a little bit too soon was having some Zoom calls and discovery calls. That was after I had my 2nd daughter and I had a call booked did not feel up to it. They ended up not even showing up, and I was like, whew. So with my third, I knew to kind of block off my schedule because I wasn't gonna feel up to having, calls and showing up in that way the first few weeks after having a baby. But it's crazy, you forget how much babies sleep, and my toddler would be sleeping, for the night, and I'd have the baby sleeping on me, and I'd be like, I actually kind of feel like looking at some work, doing some things. That was like 3 or 4 days postpartum. Now, that's what worked for me. I'm not saying that works for everybody, but because I had prepared ahead, I didn't have to get back to it. I was just excited to. As I wrap up this episode, I do want to touch on work-life balance. It's something that we hear about a lot and people talking about. You can have this amazing work-life balance, and I just want to say that it's okay to also normalize seasons. There are seasons where I have projects and things I'm focusing on with my business and I feel really wrapped up in it. And there's times where I'm full motherhood mode. And I'm not saying that it has to be either work or kids. There can be some balance, but there's also seasons where we are more focused on one area, and it doesn't feel good to be out of balance. But I think if we can give ourselves some grace and tell ourselves that this is just a season, we can even make it a short season. It's important to give ourselves that grace and know that there's not always going to be a perfect balance. So if you're interested in learning more about becoming a Pinterest manager and having more control over your schedule, I would love to invite you to check out my free training or my secret podcast, which are both linked below. And I would love for you to subscribe and check out next week's episode. So bye for now, friends.